When my father's voice echoed through that crowded hall, I swear the air itself went still. My daughter has done nothing but shame this family. The words hit harder than any bullet I ever faced. He didn't look at me when he said them. He looked past me, like I was invisible. And when he placed his hand on the shoulder of his Navy SEAL protégé, calling him the son I wish I had, I felt something inside me break clean in two. My name is Megan Holloway, and in that moment, under the weight of his pride and the silence of 100 watching eyes, I realized my father would rather honor a stranger than ever admit I'd once saved lives in his name. But what he didn't know was that his perfect soldier already knew exactly who I was, and the call sign that would burn his world to the ground. Black Widow. The afternoon sun burned through the glass windows of the Virginia Beach Naval Hall, staining the brass plaques on the wall in gold. The smell of polished metal and burnt coffee clung to the air, sharp and old. I sat in the last row, blending into a crowd of veterans in crisp uniforms and medals that flashed like mirrors. Their chatter filled the room until the master of ceremonies called my father's name. General Richard Holloway walked to the stage as if the floor still belonged to him. The applause was loud at first, then softened into the kind of reverence only small towns reserve for their legends. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His presence carried its own salute. When he began to speak, his voice cut through the room, deep and steady. Every syllable carried the weight of command, and every head turned toward him like instinct. Then came the pause, a long, deliberate one, before he said the words that emptied the room of sound. Some people carry honor, others only carry shame. The laughter stopped mid-breath. Heat climbed up my neck. I could feel 100 eyes slide toward me, the daughter sitting quietly in the shadows. My father's hand rested on the shoulder of the man beside him, Evan Klein, the young Navy SEAL he'd once trained, the man everyone said was like family to him. His smile curved, practiced and proud. If only I had a son like this. The scattered laughter that followed died as fast as it came. Evan's posture stiffened. His eyes found mine across the hall, the easy confidence fading from his face. His lips moved, barely a whisper, but the sound cut through the silence like a blade. Black Widow. Time stilled. The veterans in the front row shifted uneasily. They'd heard the name before. My father's expression faltered, confusion flashing beneath his composure as the room fell into a heavy, unnatural quiet. He didn't yet understand that those 2 words had just undone the story he'd spent a lifetime building. I stayed seated, unmoving, my pulse echoing in my ears. On stage, my father smiled for the crowd, basking in their admiration, never realizing he had just opened the very door he'd once sealed shut himself. I grew up in a house 10 minutes from the Norfolk Naval Base, a place that smelled of boot polish, coffee, and command. Every sound in that house carried discipline, the click of my father's shoes on the tile, the sharp turn of his breath when something wasn't right. By the time other kids were learning to tie their laces, I was learning how to stand at attention. Saturday mornings weren't for cartoons, they were for inspections. He would line up the shoes in the hallway and measure the space between each pair with a ruler. If one was out of place, I had to start again. When I brought home an A on an English essay, he didn't look up from the paper he was reading. "Don't get smug," he said once. "Soldiers don't brag about paper." My mother, Eleanor, was different. She taught literature at the local high school and believed in softer forms of strength. She never argued with him in front of me. Instead, she slipped folded notes into my lunch bag, lines of Dickinson, sometimes Frost. Always something she hoped would anchor me when his words went too deep. One note said, "You'll never be alone if you know who you are." At 17, I filled out the application to the Naval Academy and hid it under a pile of textbooks. I didn't dare tell him. His approval was something you earned through silence, not ambition. The day the acceptance letter came, my mother cried and laughed at the same time. 3 days later, she was gone. Stroke, they said. I buried myself in preparations, thinking that grief would fade if I stayed moving. Years later, while helping my father organize his things, I found a sealed envelope wedged in the back of a drawer. The paper had yellowed, her handwriting delicate and sure. It was addressed to him. The seal was still intact. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. A plea, a promise, a mother asking the man she loved to let his daughter be free. He had never read it. I left home soon after that, carrying the Holloway name like a weight strapped to my chest. At Annapolis, I learned the same lesson he'd spent my whole childhood teaching. Silence is survival. Only this time, it was mine to control. Years later, I was stationed in D.C., assigned to naval intelligence. My work was quiet, methodical, tracking signals, mapping movements, predicting the kind of chaos no one ever wanted to see. Then came Operation Iron Glass. Yemen, hostage extraction, high stakes, high secrecy. The night everything went wrong. The radio crackled with gunfire and broken breathing. The team's position had been compromised. Someone had leaked coordinates. The SEALs were pinned down in a canyon, seconds from being overrun. I rerouted the convoy, broadcast a decoy signal, and created false movement on enemy radar. It bought them a way out. By dawn, 6 men were alive who shouldn't have been. One of them was Evan Klein. The next morning, the report hit my desk. Operation Iron Glass, failure. My access codes were revoked by noon. By sunset, I'd been reassigned to administrative review and ordered not to discuss the mission again. A year later, a memo crossed my screen, a clearance order bearing my father's signature. He'd been the one who authorized the purge of the files. When I confronted him, his voice was as cold as the steel pins on his uniform. You think I'd let the Navy know my daughter was behind a leaked op? No daughter of mine carries that stain. It wasn't shame he protected, it was legacy. He'd rather erase me than risk his name being attached to controversy. I resigned 2 weeks later. Within the walls of the Navy, my record went blank. Outside it, the surviving SEALs whispered a different name, Black Widow, not for death, but for the webs I spun that kept them alive. The call sign stayed buried in silence for years, until that night in the Hall of Honor, when Evan said it out loud, and every ghost I'd buried stood up to breathe again. The past doesn't die. It just waits for someone brave, or foolish, enough to speak it back to life. After the ceremony at the hall, I had no intention of going to the dinner. Then his voice came through the phone, sharp and commanding after years of silence. You'll come. For appearance's sake. It wasn't a request. It was an order, like every word he'd ever spoken to me. So I went. The old officers' club sat near the shore, the kind of place that still smelled of bourbon, tobacco, and stories no one dared to tell twice. Outside, expensive cars lined the curb like soldiers standing inspection. Inside, the hum of laughter mixed with the faint burn of oak and smoke. My father sat at the head of a long mahogany table, posture flawless, metals catching the light like small suns. Evan was beside him, still in his dress blues, every inch the image of a man my father could claim as his own. When I walked in, his gaze flicked up, cold and exacting. That thin smile, sharp as a blade, cut across his face. Didn't think you'd still remember protocol. I said nothing, just took a seat at the far end of the table. He lifted his glass, leading a toast to the men of valor, to those who'd served with pride, to the brotherhood of warriors. The younger officers hung on every word, laughing in the right places, eager to please him. Then a colonel barely past 30 leaned forward, his curiosity too green to hide. Sir, was it true that the Black Widow operation saved a SEAL team back in Yemen? The chatter died. Evan's head lifted slightly. My father chuckled. The sound brittle. Black Widow? A myth from intel units. Don't romanticize failure. Polite laughter circled the table, but Evan didn't join it. His hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles went white. His voice, when it came, was low but steady. With respect, sir, it wasn't a myth. The air shifted. He set the glass down, looked straight at me, and said quietly, she was there. She led the extraction that saved us. The silence that followed was deafening. My father turned toward me, eyes like steel. You never told me you were part of that mess. I met his stare. You never asked. A young officer at the end of the table pulled out his phone, curiosity overtaking caution. A hush swept through the room as the screen lit up with classified images. Black Widow, Holloway. My father saw it. His face hardened, then cracked into a strained smile. She pushes papers, nothing more. No one moved. An older commander placed his fork down slowly, the weight of realization settling in the air. Evan straightened, his tone sharp but respectful. No, sir. She saves lives. The room stayed frozen, heavy with the kind of silence that stripped rank and reputation bare. My father sat back down, his hand trembling slightly against the tablecloth. He didn't know how to command this kind of silence, one born not from obedience, but from truth. I left the dining room as soon as I could breathe again. The hallway stretched long and dim, lined with framed photographs of soldiers saluting beneath endless flags. The carpet muffled my steps, but his voice caught me halfway down the hall. You embarrassed me. I stopped, turned, met his eyes. I didn't say a word. He faltered, the words dying in his throat. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain, like a man whose compass no longer pointed north. Evan stood near the doorway, watching but not intruding. His gaze held something my father's never had: recognition. I spoke quietly, each word deliberate. You always wanted a son, Dad. You already had one. You just never looked. He took a step back, the air between us sharp as broken glass. Evan moved closer, his voice carrying through the hall. With respect, sir. She saved 6 of us that night, including me. Every head turned. The murmur of conversation from the dining room stilled. My father tried to laugh, but the sound didn't travel far. No one joined him. An older veteran rose from his seat, hand over his heart. Then another stood, and another, one by one. They rose, no clapping, no cheering, only silence and posture, the highest gesture of honor in a room that no longer belonged to him. He looked around, searching for authority he no longer owned. The light caught the metal on his chest, its gleam cold and hollow. I felt no triumph, only a strange stillness. A weight lifted, but not joy, just release. Evan met my eyes as I passed. Ma'am, the team still talks about you. We never forgot. I nodded once and stepped outside. The night air smelled of salt and smoke. The wind whipped at the flag above the club, the stars and stripes folding into shadow and light. For years, my father believed control was respect, but as the sea roared beyond the dunes, I realized he had lost what he valued most, the command over silence itself, and for the first time, I wasn't standing in his shadow anymore. I was standing in my own. I drove through the night until the road thinned toward the sea. The air was heavy with salt and magnolia, carrying the ghosts of summers long gone. The house at the end of Seagate stood weathered but familiar, waiting. When I opened the door, dust lifted like memory, and her scent, soap, paper, ocean, wrapped around me. Her room was the only one untouched. The bed made, curtains white, a stillness that felt almost alive. On the desk sat a small wooden box. Inside lay her necklace, silver and faintly tarnished, engraved with the line she once recited to me. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. A folded page hid in the drawer beneath. The handwriting was hers. The final line faded to a whisper. She doesn't need your rank to rise. She will lead herself. I read it until the words blurred. She'd believed in me when he never could. She hadn't sent it because she knew he wouldn't dare to read it. I lit a candle beside her photograph, her hand resting on my shoulder. Not his. You were right, Mom. The truth just needed the right light. At dawn, I heard a car outside. He stood at the door. No medals, no rank, only age. He placed a tarnished medal on the table. Maybe I carried the wrong kind of pride. You didn't protect me, I said. You buried me alive, and yet you still rose. He answered. The sea outside breathed for us both. 3 days after the visit, I went back to the Naval Hall. The place was empty now, only the hum of a ceiling fan and the smell of old wood beneath the flag. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, landing on the seat where I once sat while he tore me apart. I walked to the stage, each step echoing in the quiet. The floorboards creaked beneath my shoes. I stopped exactly where he had stood and let the stillness settle before I spoke. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned, sometimes in silence, sometimes when no one's watching. My words lifted and drifted back, softer, like an echo forgiving the past. The door opened behind me. Evan entered with a few veterans. They didn't speak, just stood straight, heads high, the silence between us becoming its own salute. At the far end of the hall, my father appeared. No medals, no rank, only a man dwarfed by the light pouring in behind him. One by one, the veterans stood at attention, offering the highest respect a soldier can give. He walked toward me, voice rough, almost breaking. "You came back to teach me." "No, to remind you." He nodded, eyes wet. For the first time, I stood taller than his shadow. "You earned it," he said. The next morning, I returned to the house by the sea. The air was cool, the wind gentle, waves rolling in a slow, steady rhythm. Somewhere far off, gulls cried against the horizon. I had almost begun to believe the silence would hold, until I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. He came without calling ahead. No medals, no uniform, no practice stiffness, just a man, smaller somehow, standing in the doorway. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd once ordered me to sit up straight, elbows in, back firm. The round burn mark on the surface was still there, the scar I'd left at 16 when I placed a hot pan down too soon. He had yelled for an hour that day. Now his fingers brushed that mark softly, as if touching the memory could rewrite it. His voice broke the quiet, thin and unguarded. "I didn't know you were hurting that much. You didn't want to know," I said. The clock ticked between us, each second heavier than the last. Then he spoke again. Slower this time, as though every word cost him something. "I wanted a son." That was my failure. I met his eyes. I wasn't angry anymore. "You didn't need one, Dad. You had me." The man who once made an entire base stand at attention lowered his head, not in surrender, but in understanding. He slid a medal across the table. "This was supposed to mean something. Now I think it belongs with the truth." I set my hand over it, then pushed it back. "Keep it. You earned it your way. I'll keep mine." He nodded, a faint smile softening his face. The years seemed to fall away from him, leaving only relief. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. I smiled, the sea light spilling across the window between us. She already was. A year later, I returned to Virginia Beach for the SEAL Memorial. The sky was clear and endless, the wind sharp with salt, carrying the steady sound of flags snapping in the breeze. Rows of white chairs faced the ocean, where the tide crept closer to the shore, erasing footprints as fast as they were made. Evan stood at the podium, his uniform pressed, his voice steady and low as he read the names of the fallen. Each one carried a silence afterward, broken only by the distant crash of waves. Then he paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me near the back. To the strategist known as Black Widow, who saved lives when the world didn't even know she existed. No one turned, no one whispered. There was no applause, no fanfare. Only a few veterans placed their hands over their hearts and bowed their heads. I did the same, a small smile pulling at my lips as the wind caught the edges of my hair. The drums rolled once, twice, then faded into the rhythm of the sea. The sun glinted off the necklace around my neck. My mother's words etched in silver, catching the light one last time. In my heart, my father's voice still lingered, no longer a command, but a quiet truth. "You earned it." Peace, I thought, never arrives with noise. It comes when the truth stops, needing to defend itself. As I walked along the sand, the waves brushed against my shoes, slow and gentle, like a heartbeat. Peace doesn't roar. I whispered to the wind. It hums quietly when truth is no longer afraid.